So, in Chapter 9, we're looking at what we call propositional or sentential logic. And we mentioned how this was developed by the Stoics and grew in particular during the 3rd to 5th centuries BC. And among the things that this form of logic can help you do, it can help you work with abstract symbol systems that have logical interrelations. This, by the way, is what goes on in computer programming language. That's one thing. But second of all, through this sentential logic, we actually learn the meaning of these sentences, their logical implications. And so we can really get a better grasp of what not only other people are saying, but we can better understand what we ourselves are saying by understanding this propositional logic. The main idea here is that we represent claims with capital letters. Paul is rich implies that Paul is going to buy Q's for all of us. Well, here P stands for the claim that Paul is rich. And we're going to use these capital letters to represent claims. Then we're going to construct, in one version of testing the validity of arguments in propositional logic, we construct truth tables. And we consider the values of certain claim variables based on the truth values of other related claim variables. So if we make if we make P true, well then not P is going to be false. And if we make P false, then not P is going to be true. Then we go through a couple different symbols which are going to teach us the logical interrelations between claims that can be developed. For example, one of them is conjunction, and we use the ampersand to represent a conjunction. A conjunction is going to be true if and only if both the claims in the conjunction are true. So P and Q is going to be true if and only if P and Q are true. And you'll notice on all the other possibilities, P and Q are in fact false. And is the English word that is usually used to translate the ampersand or the conjunction. But also, but, while, and even though will work. P but Q, P while Q, all of these would serve as a form of conjunction. A disjunction is going to, in a way, be the opposite of a conjunction. And the term that is most often associated with disjunction is or. P or Q. And the disjunction is a compound claim that is false if and only if both of its parts, called disjuncts, are false. So P or Q is only going to be false if both P and Q are false. Disjunction. Any questions? These are real simple. All you need to know is the truth tables for each, essentially, and you'll know how to operate with these various forms of compound claims. A conditional claim, usually understood as an if-then claim. If P, then Q. Well, an if-then claim is false if and only if. I have an extra term there I need to clean up. An if-then claim is false if and only if its antecedent is true and its consequent is false. So the first part is the antecedent, the second part is the consequent. And in order for a conditional claim to be false, its antecedent must be true and its consequent must be false. So P must be true and the consequent must be false. Right here is the only area where the conditional claim is false. On all other conditions, all other truth values, the conditional claim is going to be true. Any questions? The conditional claim. This is the standard if-then proposition. The antecedent is the condition of a conditional claim. It's the first one. And the consequent is the conclusion of a conditional claim. If Moore's paycheck comes in, he will buy lunch. How do we symbolize this claim? Let's make this M, this L. How do we symbolize that?
Why not P and Q?
What's that?
Why is it not P and Q? It's M and L.
It can be P. You want to make this P?
Well, maybe according to the chart to understand it better.
Well, you need to understand that these are just claim variables. They can be any letter in the alphabet.
Oh, okay. So anything can be added.
Absolutely. It can be A implies B, C implies Q. So I was just going to call this M because it's more.
Oh, okay.
This L because it's lunch. How do we represent this conditional claim? If Moore's paycheck comes in, Moore will buy lunch. Excuse me? Correct. And how do we represent that like this?
And with the arrow L.
There you go. Give it up for the man. All right.
What did he say?
Very good. Really simple.
Arrow.
Excuse me?
What? I didn't get what he said. Or you just put the arrow. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. That's the symbol that we use to show the conditional. On the conjunction, we use the ampersand. On the disjunction, we use the small v. And on the conditional, we use the arrow sign. If you study, you'll get a good grade on the final. S implies G. Good grade. Now, here's something you need to ask yourself in order to understand what these conditional claims mean. What would it mean for this claim right here to be wrong? For this to be false? The claim is if Moore's paycheck comes in, he will buy lunch. Now, you need to ask yourself, what would it take for that claim to be false?
His paycheck came in, but he didn't buy it.
Correct. You need both those in order for this to be false. If you don't have this part, then this statement's not really relevant. So in other words, if Moore's paycheck does not come in, it really doesn't matter whether he buys lunch or not. This is still going to be true. The only way it's going to be false is if this is true and that is false. Very good. Very good. And that's why the conditional has the truth values that it does. The conditional is only going to be false if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That'll show that the conditional claim is false. Any questions? Do you see how what he said is necessary in order for this to be false? In order for that to be false, Moore's paycheck must come in and Moore must not buy us lunch. Now here is a truth chart, essentially a truth table, where we take certain values and we give them truth values. And here's what they could be. And then when we make these compound claims, we can determine the value of the compound claim based on the truth values of all these claim variables. And the idea is that if we make P true, we make Q true, we make R true, then this is definitely going to be true. But the value of this compound claim is going to vary as the values of these variables change. Now, we know, for example, that a conditional claim is only going to be false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So, let's look at this claim here. The antecedent is P, the consequent is Q and R. This compound claim is going to be false if and only if this is true and that is false. Well, P is true over here, and Q and R are false right here, as you can see. And so in these three cases, the value of this conditional is going to be false because the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. What you'll find is this is very, very simple. It's like simple mathematics. And once you learn each step, you can build on these steps. Don't let it scare you because it's really incremental. Each little step is pretty simple. But as you build up these steps, and by the end of the chapter, you can produce some pretty interesting stuff. Now, truth functional equivalence. What does it mean when we say two claims are truth functionally equivalent? That essentially means they have the same truth tables. Two claims are truth functionally equivalent. That's another thing I spelled wrong. Clean this up. Two claims are truth functionally equivalent if they have exactly the same truth table. What was the other one? Now, let's take a look at if and only if. These are going to have an interesting relation to conditional statements. What you're going to find is that the word if used alone is going to introduce the antecedent, the first part of a conditional claim. Consider this example. More will get wet if Parker capsizes the boat. More will get wet if Parker capsizes the boat. Now the term if is used alone to introduce Parker capsizing the boat. And as it says up here, the term if is used alone is going to introduce the antecedent, or the first part of a conditional. So when we put this in conditional form, we're going to flip it around. And we're going to say if Parker capsizes the boat, then more will get wet. And we symbolize this with the P arrow M. The idea here is that the term if used by itself is going to introduce the first part, or the antecedent of a conditional. When we get to the phrase only if, the phrase only if is going to introduce the consequent, or the second part of a conditional claim. Consider this example. Parker will pay up only if more sinks the 9-ball. Well, only if is going to introduce the last part of a conditional, the consequent. And therefore, you're going to have to rephrase this way. If Parker pays up, then more sunk the 9-ball. And they tell you in the book to not worry about the tense of these phrases. You can adjust the tense to make it work. The tense doesn't sound right because you have to put it into past tense here, but that has no logical relevance whatsoever. So the way you need to phrase this is P implies M. If Parker pays up, then more must have sunk the 9-ball. So the key here is, in ordinary language, the term if is going to introduce the first part, or the antecedent of a conditional claim. And the phrase only if is going to introduce the last part, or the consequent of a conditional. Questions? Comments? Generally no comments in logic when we're talking about issues. Now, we talked about if and only if. Well, how about if you use them together? The phrase if and only if. What if this introduces a claim? You've heard this in logic. They'll often use this phrase. If and only if. That phrase is going to be used to introduce a claim that is both the antecedent and the consequent. If something, a claim, is both the antecedent and the consequent, then you're going to introduce it if and only if. So if we say if and only if P, well, then P is going to be both the antecedent and the consequent, and it'll be phrased this way. A conditional with P as the antecedent and a conditional with P as the consequent. So the phrase if and only if is going to introduce a claim that is going to serve as both the antecedent and the consequent of a condition. If we just have if, it's going to introduce the antecedent. If we just have only if, it's going to introduce the consequent. If we have both if and only if, then it's going to introduce both the antecedent and the consequent. Any questions? All right, let's see here. Let me come up with an example and see if you can help me do this. Kalen will get an A only if he studies hard. Somebody put that in symbolic language for me. Kalen will only get an A. No. Kalen will get an A only if he studies hard. Yes, sir.
If Kalen gets an A, then he studied hard.
Yes, very good. Very good. You saw it at the bottom here. It's pretty simple. Only if is going to introduce the consequent. If is going to introduce the antecedent. Not rocket science. Now, let's consider necessary conditions. Necessary conditions. For example, the presence of oxygen is a necessary condition for combustion. This means that if we have combustion, C, then we must have oxygen. Oxygen is a necessary condition for combustion. Well, necessary conditions are expressed as the consequent of conditional claims, the last part of a conditional claim. So when we say that the presence of oxygen is a necessary condition for combustion, the way we symbolize this is as follows. If we have combustion, then we must have oxygen. If we have combustion, we must have oxygen. So necessary conditions are expressed as the consequent of conditional claims. The phrase only if introduces the necessary condition. Combustion occurs only if there is oxygen. Now, how about sufficient conditions? Sufficient conditions are slightly different from necessary conditions. Sufficient conditions demonstrate the conditions that are necessary for you to be part of a class. And if you have these conditions, they are sufficient for you to be part of this category. So, for example, being born in the United States is a sufficient condition for being a U.S. citizen. That's all you need. If you have that, you are a U.S. citizen. So that by itself is sufficient for you to be a U.S. citizen. Here's my little joke. If Obama was born in the U.S., then he is a U.S. citizen. Now, this sufficient condition is going to be expressed as the antecedent of the conditional. That means it's the first part of the conditional. So, in this claim about Obama, we have to express the sufficient condition as the first part, the antecedent. And so in the first part, we talk about Obama being born in the United States. That's going to imply that he is a citizen. So sufficient conditions are going to be expressed as the antecedent of conditional claims. Necessary conditions are expressed as the consequent of conditional claims. And as we talked about before, the term if by itself introduces the sufficient condition or the antecedent of a condition. So let's try an example here. Let's see here. Let's say that being rich is a necessary condition for being in Congress. How would I symbolize that? Being rich is a necessary condition. I'm not claiming this is true, by the way. But being rich is a necessary condition of serving in Congress. So how do we symbolize that?
To be in Congress, you have to be rich.
Yeah. So if you're in Congress, then you must be rich.
You must be.
Right. So absolutely. Necessary conditions are expressed as the consequent. Very good. Now, sufficient conditions. Now, let's just closely review. How about the term unless? Paul will foreclose unless Quincy pays up. Paul will foreclose unless Quincy pays up. What's the logic of this term unless? Well, this sentence, Paul will foreclose unless Quincy pays up, leads to this conditional. If Quincy doesn't pay up, Paul will foreclose. And this can be symbolized as follows. If Quincy does not pay up, not Quincy, implies that Paul will foreclose. Or it can be symbolized as a disjunction. Either Paul will foreclose or Quincy will pay up. So the unless can be symbolized either as a conditional or a disjunction. Can somebody give me an example of using unless? No. Yeah, pretty simple. Now, it's important to understand how either or work in conjunction. And you can see in the two examples here how that works. The use of either or is going to help you understand what's entailed in the argument that you're constructing. If we say either P and Q or R, we're going to symbolize that by putting P and Q in parentheses with the disjunction with R. And the placement of the either is going to tell you that P and Q need to be placed together. But if we say P and either Q or R, well then we're going to say P ampersand, and we're going to put Q and R in the parentheses. So it's the placement of the either, here or here, that determines whether these two are in parentheses, these two, or these two. You see that? The word if, then can function the same way. You can see here that P and if, then Q. Well, that if placed here is going to put Q and R in the parentheses. But if we move the if back here, then we're going to put P and Q in parentheses, conditional with the R. So the placement of the if is going to determine what's in parentheses, just as the placement of the either is going to help you determine what's in parentheses. Fairly clear? So, When we look at the categorical syllogisms that we studied in the last chapter, you'll find that there are only 256 forms of categorical syllogisms. There's a fixed number of forms because you have those 4 types of claims, and those 4 types of claims can be used to construct different syllogisms. Well, in sentential or truth-functional logic, there are an infinite number of truth-functional arguments. And you'll find that this form of logic is therefore much more flexible, and it can be used to systematize more aspects of ordinary language. There will be elements of ordinary language which you cannot translate into categorical logic. In many cases, you will be able to understand this discourse using sentential logic. Now, one of the keys that we focus on in the second half of the chapter is how to test the validity of arguments in propositional logic. And they provide 3 different methods for testing the validity of arguments in propositional logic. The first is the truth table method. And in general, the truth table method is simply going to be you take a compound claim and then you construct a truth table based on all the possible truth values of the claim variables in that compound claim. And you study the truth table and you make sure that the compound claim is only true when it's supposed to be. And so you can use this constructed truth table to test the validity of arguments. And actually, that's the most systematic and secure way to know that an argument is in fact valid, to run its complete truth table and test the truth table, the truth values of the compound claim, and make sure that they're only true when they're supposed to be true. So the first method for testing the validity of arguments is going to be the truth table method, where you construct a complete truth table of all the possible truth values of all the claim variables. Second method for testing the validity of arguments in propositional logic is the short truth table method. Now, what you do in this approach is you don't construct a complete truth table. What you try to do is just construct that part of the truth table that will tell you that the argument is invalid. So you try to prove the argument false. And if you're able to construct a truth table, one line of it, that shows that the argument is false, then you've succeeded and you're done. And you don't have to construct the rest of the truth table. But if you are not able to construct just one line of the truth table that makes the argument false, then you can conclude that the argument is in fact valid. And so this short truth table method is going to be an easier way to test the validity of an argument, because you won't have to construct the entire truth table. You'll only try to construct that part that shows that the argument is invalid. And if you're incapable of doing that, then you'll conclude that the argument is in fact valid. Then that brings us to the third approach for testing the validity of arguments in propositional logic. And this might be the Sherlock Holmes approach. And this is where you use deduction. And you try to use patterns of argument that have been established to be valid in the past. And you use those to move step by step, and you prove the conclusion of an argument based on the premises that you assume to be true. And so if an argument has certain premises and then a conclusion, what you do when you use this method of deduction is you take those premises and you use those accepted modes of logical argumentation. We'll talk about the acceptable moves that you can make. But you use those moves in order to try to prove, based on the premises, that the conclusion is true. And you use methods of deduction, which we'll learn. So, 3 ways to test the validity of arguments in propositional logic. Perhaps the simplest approach is to construct a complete truth table for all of the truth values of all of the claims in the argument you're considering, and then to test to see whether the argument is only true when it's supposed to be true. See if there are cases where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. If that's the case, then you know that the argument is invalid. So take a look at this. We're trying to test whether this is true or not. Okay? Once again, that's messed up. So what we're doing on this slide is we're trying to test the validity of this argument. P implies Q, and you have not P. Does that imply that we have, therefore, not Q? Well, we want to test this argument. We want to test this argument. So in order to do that, we're going to have all of the different truth, the claim variables that are involved. P, Q, not P. That's wrong too. It's P implies Q. Who did this? So here are the values, the possible truth values that all of the variables can have. Now, what we want to look to see in line 3, we can find that the premises are true. The premises are true, and the conclusion is false. So here are the premises. P implies Q is true, and not P is true. And we find that not Q is false. So in this line, the premises here are true, and this is false. Consequently, we have to conclude that the argument is not valid. Can you see in this line that these two premises are true, but not Q is in fact going to be false in this line. And so when we can prove in the truth table that the premises are true and the conclusion is false, we have in fact proven that the argument is not valid. So that's the goal in the truth table method, is to prove either that there is one line where the premises of the argument are true and the conclusion is false, and therefore the argument is invalid, or that that's not the case and that the argument is valid. Either way, though, when you construct a complete truth table, you will be able to tell. You will be able to tell. Yes, ma'am?
So on this chart, we are just considering P with the arrow Q where it's true and P not where it's true. We are not considering the other separate P and Q.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry, Vivian. Go ahead.
To show on the chart, let me show you the. So we are just considering that P stop arrow which is true and P not which is true. We are not looking at this.
Not in that case. We're only looking at the premises listed here.
Okay, so the P not and the P stop which are true, then the P, okay, therefore P not is false. Okay.
So what we're looking at, in order to show that this argument is invalid, what we need to show is that this is true, and this is false. These are only going to be important to the extent that they contribute to these right there. And so if these two premises are true and that is false, then we know the argument is invalid. And that occurs right here. P implies Q is true, not P is true, and then not Q is false. So this line shows us that the argument is invalid. But Vivian, we're going to place the truth values for these variables here early on, and they're going to help us determine what the truth value for not P and all these are. So although we're going to only use these to determine validity, we're going to use these in order to determine the values of these. Any other questions? We will have a large mass of Arctic air unless the jet stream moves south. Unless the jet stream moves south. There is no chance of the jet stream moving south. Not J. So you can bet we will be getting a lot of Arctic air. So this is a formalization of this argument. Now, what we need to do in order to test the validity of this claim is we need to construct a truth table, and then we need to make sure that there is no instance where both this and this are true and this is false. That's the key here. When we construct a truth table, what we need to make sure is there is no instance where this and this are true and this is in fact false. So we look at these where A is false, and we need to find one where not J is true and the disjunction of A and J is true. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So there is no occasion on which A is going to be false in both not J and A disjunction J are going to be true. Consequently, since there is no occasion on which both premises are true and the conclusion is false, we can conclude that the argument is valid. There is no line where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. You see how that's the goal line. We're testing the validity of the argument. The argument is only going to be invalid if there is an occasion where both of the premises of the argument or all of the premises of the argument are true and the conclusion is false. So in these truth tables, we're going to construct them, and then we're going to look to see if there's any occasion on which the conclusion is false where the premises are true.
So the air follows the ocean currents?
The air follows the ocean currents.
It's Arctic air based on the jet stream?
Yeah, you always do that. You're looking for the factual background for the logical argument, which is not relevant to the logic, but is interesting for the class. And generally do, by the way. And the jet stream and the Gulf Stream, you have the Gulf Stream in the water, which is a big water current, which, by the way, is perhaps something to look at in the future in terms of energy.
So the Japanese are working on convection current technology that would utilize this method of the cooling, warming in the water that powers the jet stream.
Interesting. I haven't heard of that approach. I do know that there
3
are...
years out, maybe.
What's that?
It's 3 years out. I got an inside tip from a Japanese water engineer on an airplane.
No kidding. But they are, these days, working on very interesting water turbine technology that in the future could really provide a great source of energy. These turbines, they turn with the current, and they generate electricity using the water currents. And there's something unique about these water currents, like the Gulf Stream in particular. It's 24/7, 365. It never stops. It's the sun's here sometimes and it's not others. The Gulf Stream is there all day, every day, and it, by the way, goes right up the the Florida coast and the East Coast in general.
Sure.
And
It moves like warm Caribbean water across the Atlantic to Northern Europe and keeps like Norway and Scotland and inhabitable.
yeah,
So what is so the desalination caused by the freshwater melt could throw off the jet stream potentially?
that's one of the concerns associated with global warming. Let me pull up this slide right here. Here, the dark red is where the current is really strong. And I was teaching right down here at Miami-Dade, and at Florida Atlantic University, they have a research project where they're studying how the water turbines function right off the coast here. And the idea is that this current is going nonstop 24/7, 365, and you put a bunch of water turbines in there, and you can generate electricity, all day, all the time. Now, what's interesting is that they are studying all kinds of things, including whether these things are going to hurt fish. And I found that to be kind of funny because, well, look, the fish is swimming right around the damn thing right now. And
It's also not moving apparently.
well, no, here's a point that's missed, is that the wind turbines are going to turn much faster than the water turbines. And the reason is that the water is like 1,000 times heavier than air. And consequently, they can set the gears on these water turbines so that they spin really fast. They move the engine real fast, just moving the arm a little bit. So they have a high gear ratio where they don't have to turn very much, but they generate a lot of electricity. And so if you put these at speed, they're turning like this. I always wanted to have an aquarium with some little miniature water turbines spinning at speed with minnows going all up and around, just to show how stupid it is that right now we're wasting millions of dollars studying whether you julienne fry fish just by using water turbines. But go figure, if you want to drill for oil on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, shit, we can do that right now. Hell, we don't need a relief well. Let's go ahead and dig it. That can happen.
Nobody seems to mind that wind turbines cause bats to explode. The noise generates the explosion, or it's catastrophic for pest control. We need them to control the same pests that attack us, like mosquitoes.
This is environmentalism to run amok. I mean, you try to do something good,
right,
and they're gonna, you hurt some ants over there.
Yeah.
I think we need to, prioritize our issues a bit.
But sure, we can.
So in other words, when we are, drilling for oil at the bottom of oceans in risky ways right now, the idea of maybe hurting a fish on occasion, not a problem. I think we ought to go with these water turbines, particularly in that Gulf Stream right along our coast. If it was way out in the ocean and you had to ship the power in, you'd lose a lot of it, obviously. You're going to lose enough just having it out in the ocean. But since that current runs right up our coast, boy, that's something that you got to look at, quite frankly. I don't know how the logic of the argument works out.
It could be used to power desalination plants as well.
Yes. Right now, these have been placed in the Hudson River, and they place these water turbines at parts of the river where it begins to contract and the river gets smaller because more water has to rush through. And you'll notice that they get grounded on the ground, but they can spin around. So when the tide of the river turns, those water turbines will turn with the tide and generate power that way. Now, in between the in and the out tide, you're not going to generate power in a river, but you will in the Gulf Stream. And that's one of the advantages of putting water turbines in the Gulf Stream, is you don't have to worry about the tides turning or anything like that. Many have pointed out that a lot of forms of renewable energy have a serious problem, and that is that they're not dependable. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow, sometimes the sun doesn't shine, like today. However, the water is always going to be running, so it's a very interesting form of potential renewable energy in the future.
Do we necessarily need oil to run the machine? To
Absolutely not.
lubricate the parts or anything?
Oh, well, to construct the water turbines, yeah.
Wouldn't take a lot, but a little bit, unless there's some.
It still would be worthwhile investment, most definitely. Particularly, in Florida. What do you want? Water turbines in the Gulf Stream, or do you want more oil drilling off our coast? For Floridians, no brainer. No brainer.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I didn't get this picture. The AV is true, and then the J naught is false. I mean, the third line you say there is no line where the premise is true and the conclusion is false.
So we need a line where both these are going to be true, and this is going to be false. And we don't have one of those.
What about the second line?
The second line,
Oh, okay, the A is not false. Okay, I see, I get it now. The A is not false.
right, you're right, the two premises are true on this one, but so is the conclusion. Any other questions? All right, does anybody have a presentation that they're prepared to give on Thursday? Anybody? You ready to rock? I think you are your group. You are the group. You can make it short. Did you guys pick something that you're going to present on?
Yeah, I said not yet. I think so.
Not yet. Well, you need an idea to present. That's the core of it. But it would be good if we had a presentation on Thursday, since we only have like a couple more days of this class, and we need to squeeze it in. So somebody think about it. Try to come up with something if you can. And what's going on politically? Anything over Thanksgiving that we need to talk about, Caleb? President Obama did not mention God in his Thanksgiving address.
Oh, wow.
That's a national security issue, I believe.
I'm sure that was just
Yeah, apparently they're making a big deal out of this on Fox. And Thanksgiving.
Where actually?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. You haven't been keeping up on Fox, Carson. Oh, man.
Nah,
Been missing out, man.
it's the YouTube address, not the written one.
Oh, good point. In the written one, he actually mentions God. And so they're making a big deal out of literally nothing at all. And all of the blonde, gorgeous news anchors are making a point of saying, oh, I had a great Thanksgiving, and I prayed to God, and turkey. Yes, sir.
I don't know, I can talk about like Black Friday, that people spend, that this year, people spend like 1 billion more on Black Friday despite the
No kidding.
Yeah.
We spent more on Black Friday than we did the year before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, last year we were all out of work.
John
Well,
Stewart.
because people are saying there's depression now, and then how come people have more money to spend on Black Friday? So,
Yeah.
Stewart was making fun of all the pepper spray guy.
Yeah.
It was saying, oh well, this Tony Baloney was a joke. He was actually soft on the protesters in New York. This guy Davis was serious, but he mentioned that there was also a lady who was shopping, and she sprayed in a Walmart.
Yes.
And she sprayed
Pepper spray.
at the other shoppers to get the last Xbox 360. And Walmart called it competitive shopping.
Competitive.
And then as there was like mayhem and pandemonium and people like screaming, holding their eyes, and like she just casually walked to the register and actually like purchased it and walked out.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Colbert said that they need to work it into a video game where they have, Black Friday edition shopping, hardcore. And, yeah.
I mean, I do understand that because Black Friday was like, I had this experience at the Target in Wheaton, and there was this like bunch of like DVDs, $2, $3, and there was this last copy of, I think it was, what movie? It was Transformers or something, the last one. And I was about to get it, and I see this kid who wants, I guess he's going for the scene. And I'm looking at him, I'm looking at his dad, I'm like, okay, this is, like, I can get this one, like. And it just looked like they wanted to get it really, really, like, really bad. So I was like, just let him get it, yeah.
You didn't body check them out?
No.
No?
You didn't pepper spray?
No pepper spray? Wow.
Did you hear about the people that were just carjacking people in the parking lot outside of like the Walmarts? They would wait for the people who stood in line, who would buy all this stuff, come out, and then they would just hold them at gunpoint, take everything that they had.
Doesn't matter what. Hopefully something good.
Yeah, but you can sell after. You don't need
They just waited for them in the parking lot. There's no way to enforce it. I think it was mainly at Walmarts too.
Like, did they wear a Grinch outfit? You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. How terrible.
Walmart.
Just sit out there and wait. No, not you. Take that
Forget the
crap.
line.
I don't want any of that. I want that guy. Yeah, the one with the Xbox. Bring it over. Where was this, by the way?
It was in a Walmart in somewhere in the Midwest. My cousin was telling me about it during Thanksgiving, or like because my Thanksgiving thing, our family's got like a 4-day celebration.
Wow. Black Friday. And what's the Monday? They call it
Cyber Monday.
Cyber Monday, where apparently a lot of sales, people going online.
Much safer.
What's that?
Much safer.
Much safer and cheaper. A lot of times you
It's
can
not
get.
safer. There's hackers.
I'd rather get hacked than stabbed.
It's a personal issue. Hacked than stabbed.
I don't know. A hack could be painful as well. If the axe is dull, then it'll take longer to hack.
Well, most of the sites that you go to for Cyber Monday are secure. So there's a disclaimer there. So if, like what he's saying, you better have like be hacked and maybe go into court or something than being stabbed. I think he's right.
There is the ability to shop for a price, and then get it used if you can find it out there, eBay and stuff. So, one of the things they say about shoppers these days is that they are much more educated. They come in knowing the deals, and they've compared online, so less patience for the salesman.
Well, I'd argue the opposite actually, because people don't realize, I talked to a lot of managers for a lot of stories about Black Friday, and it's funny because they bring in all the stuff no one wants. They actually have a warehouse dedicated to Black Friday. They just put all the crap they can't sell, they store it in there, and then they send it all to the stores for Black Friday.
Just to get people to buy
Yeah, all
the
the
crap
stuff
they
that no
don't.
one would buy any other time, and they just put it like half off, and here you go.
Wow.
You buy this, we don't have to store it.
So does that apply to Walmart shoppers as well? It's amazing that Walmart they just love people so much. They bring out the best in the individual.
And sarcasm too. Bring out sarcasm. All right, you guys have a great one. I'll see you on Thursday.
That's really